Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the ultimate truth.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Getting It Right with Rick Wagner here on KZZ 1100 and KGLN, and the podcasting and the internet, and who knows where. I can't guess anymore. Things are just moving too fast. So I had a little something to talk about this week because we're trying to keep you up on what's going on and try to dive a little deeper into some of the topics so that you have more information to work on instead of just watching people argue about it on various programs and not really give you a whole lot of information. Just a little information and then a whole lot of their viewpoints. Well, there's nothing wrong with giving a viewpoint, but you also have to kind of say, well, what's the topic? I mean, what does it mean, right? This tariff thing keeps coming up, right? And tariffs are an interesting thing. And just this week, the Trump presidency had new trade deals, right? And they took tariffs that they already had implemented on like beef, bananas, coffee, stuff like that. A lot of stuff from Latin America. And they want to lower the grocery prices. Yeah, I get that. Grocery prices are a good way to stay in office or get out of office if you don't control them. But it isn't just like a trade store, when you think about it. I mean, tariffs are a strange thing. And some of you saw that, Ontario, Canada, they were running that commercial in the United States with Reagan talking about how tariffs were bad and this and that. Well, that's a little out of, not exactly context, but the time was different. So I'll give them that was not perfectly representative of Ronald Reagan's position as it would be now. I mean, we used to always talk about free trade. Ronald Reagan was all about open markets. Milton Friedman was against tariffs, said there were hidden taxes. And we just didn't want to do that. We had, open markets. But that's changed. Remember we had NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Association, China's WT, World Trade Organization entry. I was trying to think of that. Detroit looks like, like Detroit now. I think you all know what that looks like. And we feel like we're getting taken advantage of across the globe. And we are, really. We are trading freely with people that are slamming tariffs on our goods and services. So because of that, it makes it a little lopsided. The president has that right. And I think Trump has sort of led the shift on that. I mean, some of the things that we're just not making here, steel, aluminum, some of our rare earth material processing, antibiotics, stuff we don't really need. It's just all been outsourced. And it's been outsourced because it was cheaper to do out there, and we were just letting it keep coming in. And some of it is up to the consumer. Let's face it. Think about not that many years ago, how much like a T-shirt cost or something of that nature, just basic clothing. And then think about what you could get it at Walmart now or Costco or one of these other outlets. It's a lot cheaper. Why is that? Well, it's made in China, much of it. Some of it are made in Indochina and other places where the wages are just really low. And you get to a place like China, where not only are the wages low anyway, but they're artificially controlled by the government. And the government sort of sets the stage for how business works in there. So we're not really competing on a level playing field. We've priced our labor up really high, especially with some of it. And some of it just because we think it's a good idea. Let's make the minimum wage $20 an hour. Let's make it $23 an hour. I don't know, $30 an hour. A couple of places that are talking about it. Based on what? We all know that certain jobs are only worth so much money. We've all had those jobs where we've worked hard, but we didn't make a whole lot of money because our contribution while significant in terms of labor, was not significant in terms of how much money the company made. And so that's kind of how that works. If you turn that on its head and say that all work should be paid for the same, right? Remember, this is what happened during the Equal Rights Amendment. People were talking about that, and then they'd get kind of absurd when you started thinking about it. Then you're just devaluing the divisions between work, between people who do certain kinds of work and the productivity, and how much of a value to the finished product that labor adds. That tells a lot about it. And if you just arbitrarily start changing that number, you're fiddling with the economy in a way that just cannot work. And of course, what you're going to do is you're going to put people out of business artificially, and you're going to raise inflation because you're just going to pump money in. And the productivity doesn't go up, just the money that comes in. And when you pump money into a system without productivity, inflationary pressure rate comes up. It's not taking a genius. It's a good thing, too, because we don't have hardly any of them in Congress. So you go to places like Latin America, which a lot of this is still the same as we talk about Indochina and China. We're trying to get trade agreements with them because we do get a lot of foodstuffs from down there. I mean, some of the people, you say in Montana, probably don't realize that oranges don't grow in Montana at all, much less in the winter when they go to the store and buy some. Yeah, so those are coming from someplace else. And when you start getting coffee, beef, produce especially, and things like that from another country, then the price that you're taking that from is going to reflect on the price that you pay here. Well, what that means is that local producers, in some sense, can't compete because they're artificially constrained on the other side, well, on our side, because we're not competing against someone who is free trade. They set the standard. They decide how much they're going to sell it for. It doesn't just float, right, between whatever I'll pay for it and whatever you'll take for it. It gets funky. And now that we have some of these trade agreements in Central and South America, we're trying to really go with that. And we've had some luck, by the way, with some of these South American countries. I think Ecuador is more on our side. Argentina is great. Argentina's turned their government around, became fairly, considering they're pretty socialist, fairly conservative. And the president down there is a big fan of Trump's. And we just did a soybean deal with them. And some of course, the left, who doesn't understand what a soybean is or how people make food, they were all over, oh, well, we're giving it away. No, we made a trade deal with them where they buy our stuff, and we're going to come out a little ahead on that deal, and it'll help Argentina. That's not a bad thing, as opposed to coming out on the upside and helping China. So, or the downside, I should say. But if you keep tariffs high for very long, then services, well, goods go up. And if we want things to be built in the United States, the problem with that is, it's not really a problem, it's just the way it works, is that if we put a tariff on steel so that steel in some places is subsidized by government in the production of it, and we put a tariff on that, well, the price of everything made with steel goes up. And at some point, it makes sense to build it in America again because the value is higher. Okay. But why did it go overseas to begin with? A lot of it was just bad politics. And some of it was just pricing ourselves out of the market, too many regulations to get something going, too much EPA stuff on some of these regular, smokestack industries to where they just couldn't make a dollar because it cost them too much to make that dollar. So they went someplace else. Now, some of it didn't turn out so well. I mean, some of these places, like for your good old solar panels and so forth, they get manufactured in China, and there's some pretty seriously bad chemicals in them. But that's okay as far as the Chinese are concerned. And here, we want all these solar panels, but, man, we're not crazy about, just dumping some of that stuff into, some prairie dog holes behind the factory. So it gets more expensive. So we have a hard time with that, but we've sort of run things out that way. And it doesn't mean you have to trash the environment to do better. It means you just have to use your head a little bit. We have some things in our regulations now, I mean, you just look at California as a great example of this. They have things that just make no sense whatsoever. They're based on an idea that either is really old and didn't work, or is really new and didn't work, or is really new and not true. But they're making people pay for it. You can't do that and expect to keep your industries in your country. Okay, folks, thanks for sticking around for our second segment here, and I have another topic I wanted to get to. And I have to line these out, otherwise I end up not getting to half of them that I would like to talk about. This one is one that I got a lot of questions about. Well, I would say conversation about this week. And that's what's going on in these cities between the federal government, ICE and Homeland Security and so forth, and these wacky mayors, governors, who knows whom, police, police captains, well, not police captains, police chiefs, and all. I mean, what's happening here, right? It's, what happens when federal agents try to pull immigration law and drug enforcement and even protect, the infrastructure, like their own buildings? And the state or city or operating says, no, we don't want you to do that. I mean, that's a hard thing to sort through because it hasn't happened all that many times in history. In our history. And when local officials don't just say, we don't want you here, but they get in the way of the federal enforcement. Is that just a protest? Or is there some kind of line they're crossing? Is that a crime? Are we kind of cracking wide open here? We have state and local governments interfering, which is a crime, with the enforcement of federal law. Now, we're all federalists here in the sense that the states have a lot of authority over their own goings-on. But some of these things are clearly within the province of the federal government. Immigration, for one, it's not something you argue about. It's not unclear. It's right there. It's very clear that the federal government is charged and solely charged with immigration enforcement. And some of the other things, even drug enforcement that crosses state lines, things like that the feds can be triggered for. And it's not like they're making it up. It's not like they're coming in and enforcing something that they just think would be a good idea. They're trying to enforce something that hasn't been done. And hasn't been done because a lot of these cities, especially, a couple of states, have decided that they can choose what laws they like, what laws they don't. If they're not crazy about them for whatever reason, then they'll just not enforce them. Okay, that's bad enough. You see what happens then in San Francisco and Portland, and now Seattle's even going to be worse. This new mayor in Seattle. I thought that you couldn't get further away from someone that had real world experience than Zoran Madami there. Wow, the new mayor in Portland is just she doesn't appear to have any real job ever. So does Madami. He doesn't have one either. But she right now lives in a 600 square foot apartment. For a long time, her and her significant other made a living by busking, which is to go around, in places and play their guitars and sing and whatnot, and people would give them money. And then participate in all of these different causes and different organizations. So she became a voice for all of these sort of interesting left-wing, non-governmental organizations and so forth. She had no experience writing anything, really. Now she's the mayor in Portland. And she's got some really interesting ideas, as you might think. She's right there with Mondami, except that she's not as articulate, let's say. How she got elected, how the people in Portland chose her, I don't know. We have to really start looking at these cities about what's going on in city elections. Who's voting? Not people whose interest it is to make a living, to have their own business, apparently to own private property. They don't seem to be real involved in the voting process. We need to start figuring out why that is. So let's go with the D.C. D.C. is an interesting thing because the Congress can override things that the D.C. Council does because it's a District of Columbia. It's not a state. They're going to do it on criminal enforcement, illegal immigration, allowing non-citizens to vote, for instance, stuff like that. But everybody, oh, no, let D.C. govern itself. Well, D.C. is about 92% Democrats. And they really don't like who's in power now. But oddly enough, the people that are in power are all around them in D.C., so they really don't like that. Now, not that long ago, D.C. was asking for protection against certain kinds of state laws and complaining about, guns coming in from Virginia or this and that, and wanted Washington's help. Not so fast. Because it's just a federal district. It was never meant to be fully autonomous. And when federal law is not being enforced, Congress has every right to step in right there, not just on matters that the federal government has inherent in its abilities like immigration, multi-state drug trafficking, things like that. But they can step in and say, look, there's too much crime here. I mean, you're not completely autonomous. You exist at the suffrage of Congress, of the United States. The whole branch is there because you're not a state, which they would love to be a state. So if you'd like to think that's a good idea to take just a city and make it into a state, give it 2 senators, then you really must be a Democrat, because that's what they want to do. They want to take D.C. and turn it into a state. It'll have 1 congressman and 2 senators. And then they'll get Puerto Rico in there, too. What they're hoping is they'll go to these places that are incredible left-wing bastions, and they'll just get a permanent left-wing influence. And a couple of senators from a new state make a lot of difference in the Senate. So they've been wanting to do that for a while. But in the meantime, what D.C. has shown is that it can't govern itself. It can't protect people. It can't protect its own citizens. It can't protect its own governmental operations. How does that give you an idea of like, yeah, well, we need to do more of that. We need more freedom to not do things. Now, there's a little thing in the Constitution called the Supremacy Clause. Most of you guys there know that. And here's what it says. The Constitution and the laws of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and judges in every state shall be bound thereby. So if a federal law is valid and constitutional, passed by Congress, signed by the President, if there's a conflicting state or local law, the federal law trumps it. No pun intended. It's not optional. It's a foundational part of the Constitution. So a federal agency, somebody like ICE, DEA, ATF, comes in to enforce those laws, and local people block them, delay them, fight with them, throw sandwiches at them, whatever they're doing, they're not really standing up for local rights. They're interfering with the Constitution. That's kind of what people kind of skip over. The Constitution is pretty clear about who has rights to what part of the government, state, federal, local, to enforce certain laws. And very clear on some of these with the federal government. And the Supremacy Clause says, look, you can pass all the laws you want to, but if they're in conflict with the Constitution, they don't stand. This makes people in some of these states just furious. They think they can go to a supermajority of Democrats in their legislature and pass something that is really not contemplated it may be contemplated by the Constitution as something we should never do, but nevertheless, they can't do it. Now, the 10th Amendment grants powers that aren't delegated to the federal government, to the states. Now, we know that during the Obama administration and the Biden administration, the 10th Amendment is not paying a lot of attention to that, 9th and 10th both. They're just, well, we've decided that everything is given to the federal government. That tune has quickly changed. And so you get this idea of just chaos now, right? You don't have a republic. You just have this patchwork of like micro-regimes, sort of like Greek city-states all over the place with their own laws, their own way of doing things, their own law enforcement. Some of these cities, I feel sorry for the cops here. The chief enforcement officer of the city is the chief of police that's appointed by usually the mayor, or in some places the city manager. But so they don't really work directly for the people. People have no input about they get their job, keep their job, or anything like that. So if the council is going one way and the mayor feels one way, then if the chief of police would like to keep his job, the police department feels the same way. I've never thought that was a great idea, but that is what happens. So we're going to have to resolve this in some way, and the Supreme Court is probably going to have to get involved. I mean, they're having to get involved in everything. I hate seeing it this. I hate coming down to the courts all the time, particularly as crazy as some of them are in the federal courts, like the district courts and so forth. And then it gets up to the Supreme Court, and you just hope they have some sense. If you listen to a couple of them on there, Sotomayor, Jackson, sometimes Kagan, you would think that they don't know what the Constitution is and don't want to know. But by and large, people in charge do know something about the Constitution, but we're going to have all this come up. I mean, should we arrest the mayor if he orders the police to not help ICE defend federal buildings? Is that something that's against the federal government, or is it just against the people of the city? So is that obstruction? What is obstruction? Now, we've got people from Congress out there fighting with ICE agents, not charged with obstruction, but they're in places, if they actually go to trial, the jury will probably just let them go. But that's how that works. It's bad. That's how that works. Okay, folks, thanks for sticking around for our third segment here. I appreciate it. We're going to go back down south of the border again for this piece. I want to talk about something that, once again, people were talking to me about, and so I decided we would try and enlarge on it here in the show. I also played, now those of you that get the podcast and stuff like that won't hear the bumper music or something else, but I played a little Miami Vice music to kind of bump in there to kind of give us that sort of south of the border kind of feel, that sort of driving around, no socks, convertible night where it's always wet in the street for some unknown reason so that the lights can reflect off the hood of the car. Yeah, that's kind of giving us that. But I was talking to people. I don't know if they were interested or not. But how do people feel about what's going on with, say, Venezuela and that area down there, and the fact that we're moving a lot of military assets down there? And, of course, they're blowing up some boats from time to time, too. Remember, the Gerald R. Ford, which is the largest aircraft carrier in the world, is down there with its whole flotilla. Remember, aircraft carriers, well, they have a tremendous potential for offensive capabilities. As time has passed, are more and more vulnerable to different kinds of attacks. We've talked about the 4 slow-moving missiles, hyper missiles on the other end of it, drones, things like that. And one of the things, of course, that you can mess with a great big aircraft carrier, you don't have to try and sink it, is you can damage the deck in such a way that they can't launch or receive planes. Now, they're kind of ready for this. They get quite a few people on board there, that if something happens, they can try and get it cleaned up, but it still can cripple them. So they travel with a big screen of missiles, sometimes a couple submarines out there, and missile cruisers and things like that to try and keep things away. So there's quite a number of vessels and manpower down there. So what we doing? Well, I think if you listen to the administration, is we're trying to send a little message to Maduro in Venezuela that it's time to pack up and head out, which he's not going to do, or he hasn't done anyway. But then the question remains, okay, let's say that it is correct, and I think it's really probably is, that he is, in essence, captured by or within the drug cartels. And they are consistently shipping drugs into America that cripple or kill American citizens. And he won't stop. Or he won't stop the people from doing it. Doesn't make any real effort to. So you get designated as a criminal organization, or a enemy, essentially, is what we've designated the cartels. So if you're working with the cartels, even if you're the president of Venezuela, does that mean you're sort of a terrorist organization and you're just the head of it and you just happen to be the head of a country? And there's a lot of questions about whether or not any elections down there have actually went his way. But they can be made to go his way, I suppose. So there's a lot of tension. We haven't really tried this before. We also have been putting a little pressure on Colombia. Remember, Colombia is where a lot of the cocaine comes from, and it was really connected to the Miami Vice years. And the Colombian president responded by saying that Trump needs to be taken out. So that's not helping him in terms of not sounding like a criminal conspiracy of some sort. But Venezuela seems to be part of it. But we're sort of reviving something that many of you will remember from school. Remember the Monroe Doctrine? That powers, it was originally adopted under President Monroe, obviously, but it was mainly talking about European powers, that you don't get to come into the Caribbean or places in our backyard and run around and do destabilizing things because it's our backyard and we don't like it. Now that sort of has fallen out of favor, right? But we've been sort of escalating things down there to show that we do, in fact, think the Monroe Doctrine still is in existence, and that if you are causing a problem in the area, and even if you're from the area, maybe that's a problem. It certainly seems like it is. We've been carrying airstrikes against, some of these vessels that allegedly were involved in drug trafficking. I was looking, we had like 20 strikes supposedly since early September. Now, intelligence says that they're tied to cartels and networks using Venezuelan or regional waters as transit. Legal justification is designating these cartels as narco-terrorist organizations, declaring them non-state armed groups, permits lethal action under the National Defense Doctrine. That's the theory in which we're doing it. It's a lot more than just kind of a routine interdiction. Traditionally, in history, the U.S. counter-narcotics operations in Latin America have been through the Department of Justice, trying to, work with them down there. We have sent some special forces team from time to time to work with, say, the Colombian Army and people like that. Too much to expect that we can. And but for the most part, we haven't done airstrikes like that. And the Coast Guard has been a screening operation. And now, if you've seen, the Coast Guard is now, they're not afraid to shoot at these guys. I don't think they should be. But in the past, the Coast Guard has went out of its way to try and just chase these guys down and round them up. Now, if there's any hesitation there from them, they'll just turn a .50 caliber loose on you, or probably a 20-millimeter cannon. And that's not something that you want to have happen to you, and you're a boat full of drugs or, anything else, like maybe gasoline might be in there to frontier Indians. This is not a good thing. So the Coast Guard has been getting much more aggressive, which, by the way, having the Coast Guard get more aggressive and being more involved in this kind of stuff and publicity around it has made people want to enlist in the Coast Guard. All of this military operation has actually really stirred people's interest in being part of the military. This, of course, makes people on the left crazy. But they all know, we all know, that the military exists to try social welfare reforms on, right? It's to, that we can try, air flight suits for pregnant people, that we can run DEI on everything, that just whatever social experiment that you'd like to see in society, you could do it in the military, because if you have the presidency, he can just order it done. Now, the idea that we might actually want the military to blow things up and get rid of people who want to harm us, who do we think we are? What do you think we use the military? That's not what the military is, at least if you ask some of the people. Probably those people in Portland, I guess. So that's the pretty difficult situation we get in with the left. They don't quite know what to do with it. The fact that United States Southern Command, SOUTHCOM, is down there running around, doing some airstrikes, showing the big stick, as it were, and saying these are non-state armed terrorist organizations, and we have a right to strike them. Think about this what we did in Iran recently. We bombed their nuclear facilities. Congress declared war on Iran. I missed the news a couple of days, but I don't think that happened. But we've declared Iran as being the basic supporters of a terrorist organization, and that their prominence, rising prominence, is a threat to national safety and defense. And so we have the right to respond. The president has the right to respond with the military through certain types of what we always refer to as police actions. Remember the police action in Vietnam? Yeah, it was never declared war. And if you look what happened in Korea, same kind of thing. We haven't declared war on someone through the Congress, I don't think, since the Second World War. But we've had plenty of interdictions. We've had plenty of men fighting. We've had plenty of ground lost, ground gained, good men killed in the service of something. So it isn't like we just thought of this today. But, how far does it go? And this is a good question. It would have been a good question with Lyndon Johnson as the war just got more and more escalated, and people who were even believing in the domino theory, the idea that if Vietnam fell, then the other actors would fall around them and so forth, were wondering, well, how much escalation can we do here if we're not at war with them? And that was never really answered. So, and we've had some legislation since then, the War Powers Act and so forth. But no matter what Congress wants to do, they run headlong into the Constitution. The Constitution exacts the executive power to exercise executive functions. Defense of the country is an ultimate executive function. So how much constraint Congress, or even the courts, can put on that is really a difficult question. Now, we have had some courts, some of the federal district courts, 635 of them, something like that. Some justices out there that think that they can become foreign policy experts or immigration law experts, and that not only can they do it in their own jurisdiction, which is usually relatively small compared to the United States, but they can issue a national injunction. And it's more fascinating to see them do that now because the Supreme Court is pretty clear that the ability to issue national injunctions was frowned upon unless you could really make a case that the case you were working on had a set of national plaintiffs or people affected by it. Well, the left just says that. Well, immigration affects everybody. Really? I mean, you think that's enough to get one judge in, the Southern District of Portland to issue a nationwide mandate to stop the president from doing something that has to do with the executive branch? Even if you have a question about it, should they have that kind of authority? Well, no. It's not anywhere. And even though the Supreme Court's spoken out against it, they just keep doing it. So there is a real question about how you define what we're doing in Latin America right now. And some places in Latin America are really a mess. We all know that Mexico is pretty much a failed state. The northern provinces in Mexico aren't really run by the Mexican government. And some think that the Mexican government isn't run by the Mexican government. Too much violence, too much money, too much fear has infiltrated almost all pieces of the governmental functions in that failed state. And it seems to be just sort of sinking. It used to be at least the tourist hotspots were relatively free of it. Now they get some shoot-em-ups going on there. It isn't usually at tourists. It's usually between competing cartels or gangs who want to establish this as their turf area to sell drugs to the tourists. Because, hey, if they're making all their money selling drugs to people in the United States, when those people come to the United States for a vacation, they ought to be able to do it down there. And, they solve these problems directly. They start shooting at each other. And sometimes people are in the way. It's not a great place to be if you're down on vacation and you're covered in your sunscreen and you're laying out on the beach and somebody opens up with some sort of semi-automatic weapon firing at somebody at the other end of the beach, but it's kind of over your head. That's not a feeling you like. It's not relaxing. It's not really the vacation you were looking for. And that's starting to happen more and more. But it's also happening in Venezuela, because Venezuela has been circling the drain since Hugo Chavez, which is really interesting because Venezuela had the opportunity to be a pretty well-off nation because they have a lot of oil. And oil exports were really pouring some money to the country. If only people, who actually lived in the country could get their hands on it. But, gosh, it went through so many government officials. It just wasn't able to really find its way down to the folks. And then Chavez, while he was still alive, nationalized, I always like that term, nationalized oil production. That's just taking them over. I mean, a lot of these oil production facilities were built predominantly by Chevron, Exxon, people like that. And nationalizing them means that you just threaten them to run them off so you think you can run them, and they don't get any more money out of them. Now, immediately what happened, of course, was even more graft and corruption crept into that system. And then the other thing they found out that is when they ran all these people off that had been working in these places, they didn't have anybody that knew how to run these places. So a lot of the equipment and the whole thing about the oil production not only was screwed up politically, but it was just the politics were screwing it up mechanically. They couldn't run it. So things have gotten even worse. And, of course, the answer to that is to have just more suppression. And then you get somebody like Maduro who, can stay in power forever. It's the sort of thing they keep accusing Trump of, which he keeps trolling them by talking about it. That's not going to happen. And the money that comes in the country now isn't so much from oil, but it appears to be coming from dealing with cartels and narcotics, which bring in a huge amount of money, unfortunately. And you have to look around them. Like I said before, Ecuador seems to be turning the corner a little bit. They seem to be more conservative this last election. Argentina certainly is. Peru, we don't know. Peru could get a little better. It's been a mess since Pinochet, and it just bounced around. It survives. I mean, it's not Mexico, but it's not in the greatest shape. And then, of course, you get Brazil. And Brazil's an interesting country from the fact that they have little clusters of sort of civilization. Right? The nice part of Rio, other places along the Copacabana there, that's all nice. But when you get into the interior and sometimes just outside of these towns, it's a very different deal. And the government has very little control over it. I mean, it's not as nutty as Mexico, but it's headed that way. And they have a the president down there that is pretty hardcore leftist. And so, well, he is because Gavin Newsom was down there this week signing a climate accord to preserve the forests. Now, if that isn't one of the most ironic things I've ever heard, Gavin Newsom, who lets his state burn down, wasn't even there for part of it, hasn't changed any of the policies that caused the thing to burn down, doesn't seem interested in shaping up the idea that they need some water in their reservoirs, or perhaps firing and getting rid of the people that didn't put water in the reservoirs. No, he's running for president because, golly gee, folks, he's done such a great job there. I mean, there's the kind of narcissism at work there that, well, you almost have to admire it. It is a total disconnection from reality and a focusing on yourself to the point where you're just not seeing what you're doing and the consequences. And it works with some people because they just go out with such confidence and speak to people, and people, I don't know, he must know what he's talking about. I don't know. Especially if you're not as informed about what's going on. And that's who he's trying to appeal to. But he was down in Brazil this week, signing an agreement with Brazil. Can't sign a treaty because as much as they'd like to be, California is a state. It's not the government. And the federal government handles things like international relations and treaties and so forth. So this is just an agreement. So Gavin went down there, agreement about trying to preserve the forests. And some people have pointed out that that is just one of the craziest things they've heard. He has no conception of fault or shame. This is sort of your classic, mental health issue is, any normal person would say, I'm under a lot of pressure here for letting the state burn down and doing nothing in the forests. Maybe it's not a great time to go down and, align with another country far away and say, we're going to get in here with you and save our forests, because either we don't believe that or we're really bad at it. So he was down there. But the situation in Latin America and South America is volatile, and it's a little worse than I think we see reported. We're trying to make it very clear we're going to run that part of the ocean. If it looks like people are coming to the United States to do harm, we're going to interdict. And we're going to decide based on our intelligence who that is. Now, some of you may know that Britain, which is in its last, just really on its last legs. I mean, it's emaciated, it's staggering around, it's drunk, it's going to fall down soon. I hope not. But anyway, they've decided that they don't like these strikes, and so they're not providing any intelligence from their end to facilitate the United States work there. Well, thank you. You people, have tried to control violence by taking everyone's guns away, and then when people were getting chopped up with knives, trying to pass laws about how long your knives can be and who can purchase knives. And then where does that end up? Well, they're still whacking people with machetes and knives, but then they also run cars into people and this and that. They've lost control, and they've lost control of their immigration to the point where, in a couple of decades, more people are going to be in England that aren't from England, in other words, weren't born there and stuff, than are. And that doesn't exactly work for cohesion. So I'm sorry that you feel that way, folks, but I don't think we need your intelligence about what's going on in the Caribbean. If we need the British to tell us what's happening in the Caribbean, we have let things get really bad in our intelligence agencies. Think about that. And I think they have been improving. The CIA is a cesspit, as we all know. If you look at who was running it. I mean, Brandon and those people, no wonder. But we have to have it. We should try and make it effective. It's a terrible place to try and figure things out because by its very nature, things have to be secret. It has to have a budget that doesn't say exactly what it's doing. Oversight is very hard to keep because Congress has a tendency to leak things that they're doing. Imagine Adam Schiff, being in charge of, knowing things what the CIA were doing if it were something to do with something he didn't like. You think that would stay in his little head? I don't. It seems kind of off-putting to me. But so that's where we're at. We really got to watch what's happening down there in the Caribbean. There's going to be some kind of change. We'll see if Maduro is going to keep sticking his chest out at the United States or...
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening. Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.